Hello, speakers and leaders, and welcome to our Boston Speaks series. We're talking all about emotional intelligence today. And if this is your first time joining us for our Boston Speaks series, as people are coming on, can you just type a 1 in the chat? Or if you have been here for more than one Boston Speaks series, how many times have you been here? Type that into the chat as well. Today, usually when I send out emails to the Boston Speaks series, on my end, I usually don't get much responses back. Some people would just register. But for this series, emotional intelligence, you wouldn't imagine all the emails that I got back. People are saying, I'm registered. Oh, I want to learn more about emotional intelligence. This is what I need. It was one of the biggest response I ever got back from the email list when it came to emotional intelligence. And if you are on right now, maybe you don't know that much about emotional intelligence. Maybe you need to know a little bit about it, but it's one of the most important skills we need to master, for our personal and also professional growth as well, to help us be leaders, to help us be more in control of ourselves. But I'm not going to get down into it. Of course, our lovely panelists will tell you everything about emotional intelligence, and they are some of the best. But before we get down to our panelists, I just want to explain what's going to be happening today. So first, I'll be introducing our panelists, and I always like to say to our panelists, please ask each other questions. And then at any time, audience, if you're watching live right now, please feel free to type into the chat any questions that you have, and I'll make sure that we'll get to them to the best of our ability. And this event is for you. Please be selfish and ask the questions that you need to ask, because this event is for you. But before we get into introducing the panelists, I want to quickly ask you a quick question. Are you suffering from stage fright? And I'm asking this because this, at Boston Speaks, this is the one main thing that we help people with, and it's not easy. Other people might use terms like performance anxiety, fear of public speaking, glossophobia. And if this sounds like you, I just want to quickly check in with you. Does the thought of publicly stating your opinions fill you with dread? Or maybe do you avoid public speaking or presentations whenever you hear them? You just want to run away from them? Or does being observed by others make you feel terribly anxious? Or do you feel like everyone is judging you when you are the center of attention? If this all sounds like you, I want you to know that we'll be hosting a live webinar that's happening next Thursday. 4 simple steps you can take to diminish your public speaking anxiety. And if you would like to register for that, I'm going to put in the link in the chat. You can also go to bostonspeaks.com/no-fear-speaking. But without further ado, I would love to really get down to it, introduce our panelists. We're joined by the lovely Jules, Brian, and Rebecca today. I'm very honored to have them. And if you are excited to be here, can you type into the chat how excited you are? Give me a percentage. Maybe, is it 50%? Is it 100%? Is it 1,000%? But first, please, I want all of you to meet Jules Wilhelm. Now, Jules Wilhelm is the founder of Capacity Leadership Center. She's an emotional intelligence coach and culture consultant and psychotherapist. Being the founder of Capacity Leadership Center and Cardia Counseling Center, Jules has been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. In the last 7 years, she has taken all she knows from her work with her clients and applied it to the leadership world. Emotional intelligence will save your bottom line. Next, please meet Brian Fretwell. Now, Brian Fretwell is the founder of OneMeaningfulQuestion.com, a company dedicated to helping people create deeper connections, have more meaningful conversations, and build stronger communities by asking better questions. Whether it's a parent trying to help their kid build confidence, and partner trying to help their spouse see the potential, or a manager trying to help an employee recover from a setback, connection, validation, and reinforcement start with one meaningful question. Now, next, Rebecca Davenay. She's a serial entrepreneur and co-founder of Culture Theory. Rebecca is a serial entrepreneur who has led multiple companies past $1 million valuations and one exit. Her fourth company, Culture Theory, uses her true passion, emotional intelligence training to develop stronger leaders and businesses. Rebecca has been featured in Forbes, Open Forum, Success Entrepreneurs, Inc., and other publications. She is an avid fan of chess, nature, bad movies, and any dog. So I want to say welcome, panelists. Come on up. We are super, super glad to have you. Welcome. Come on up, everyone. Hello. How's everyone doing?
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having us here. Looking forward to the chat.
I like to say later on when we get down to questions, please feel free to ask each other questions. I always like to also say to panelists, sometimes if you disagree with each other, please disagree out loud. We would love to hear what you're thinking. But getting right down to it, emotional intelligence. Can I just ask you, why is it important for you, and why do you think it's important for our audience to really understand and take it in today? If anyone wants to, yeah. Oh, one more thing too. When sometimes panelists, I always like to say, don't feel like every person has to answer these questions. Sometimes when we're on a panel, we're like, okay, one goes, another goes, and another goes. But feel free to just jump right in at any time too. Yeah. Why is it important for you, and why for our audience today?
I'd like to pipe in. I think as we have experienced the impact of the pandemic, what life values and importance have crystallized for a number of us. And for a long time, it came down to, who am I living with? What kind of conversations am I having? And how does it feel to be around the same people all the time? And to invest in that in a way that strengthens and deepens our sense of groundedness and connection. Those skills are emotional intelligence. And so in many ways, it's the basis of like peace and worldwide connection that will recalibrate us to move back into our life in a more, and hold on to that connection. And the value at the end of the day is who I feel connected to. As we sort of walk our way back out of the pandemic and into a more balanced life.
Yeah, I'd say my connection to emotional intelligence is very personal. When I was a teenager, my father was incarcerated and I lost sort of my family. And a friend of mine gifted me the book, Emotional Intelligence. And if you look at it now, it's by Daniel Goleman. He's, one of the OGs. He's an incredible human. And it says, might be more important than IQ. And now we know it's responsible for 70% of success. It's responsible for 90% at high performers. I mean, there's nothing better to spend one's time on in terms of success. But for me, I got the book and it validated the things I needed to validate, that like having self-awareness, having self-regulation, these things were important. But also it taught me motivation. It taught me forgiveness. I mean, that book like changed my life. I went from a poor student to being valedictorian within about a year and a half. And I just had never had anyone explain the world in a way that made sense to me. And Daniel Goleman did. And so I take that now and I feel like it's like this gift that now I give because he like gave it to me. And all my successes, my companies, school, everything that I was able to do in my life was because of emotional intelligence. None of it had much to do with IQ. And so I just think, and then more importantly, my relationships, which is everything to me. Like that is what, if my relationships are good, I'm good. Work, can come and go. It's not really as important. And those only function well if I'm paying attention, activating and expanding on my emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I would think about what was used to be a teacher in a juvenile corrections facility a couple lifetimes ago, and something about that experience that you see these individuals, right? You're trying to change behavior, you're trying to right? Kind of help them create a better life. And you can't help but self-reflect, or you certainly can help and self-reflect. Plenty of people do, but if you do the work of seeing yourself in their bad behaviors and good, I think that's where we learn the most about ourselves. And so for me, emotional intelligence is really just the understanding that we understand ourselves better through interactions and understanding other people, like that duality. And so if I want to really understand who I am, right, it's actually through those interactions I have with other people that understanding deepens. And when you're able to do that, or the more we do that, the more we strengthen that muscle, the more effective we are at, navigating our own kind of behaviors and choices, but also helping and being influential with others.
Yeah. And can I ask, let's say the audience, or I'm treating, from my mindset as well. Let's say maybe I've heard of emotional intelligence. I've seen it once or twice. I know that maybe there's a book out there. What is it? Is it just knowing myself? Is it writing my feelings down? Is it knowing other people's feelings? I'm just really coming from the beginner's mindset. What the heck? What the heck is it?
Yeah, so my, if you will, philosophy on that is it's actually two things. Like, there's the intellectual understanding of emotional intelligence, which in my opinion has very little value. What I mean by that, there is a level of value, but because I can pass a test on what self-awareness is or what empathy means or anything like that, doesn't actually give me a whole lot of, if you will, advantage in the world, but also it doesn't help me with the understanding that I need. And so maybe that's like emotional intelligence is a noun, and then looking at it more as a verb, I look at it, and we talk about it all the time, as a muscle that is developed, right? And it's developed consistently every day, whether you do that on purpose or not. And so just like any muscle, whether it's empathy, whether it's gratitude, whether it's self-validation, the more I attune, the more I pay attention to, and the more I'm purposeful about developing the muscle, the more I can use it. And the less I pay attention, the more, if you will, accidental I am about, if you will, developing those, again, the less I'm able to use it, like anything else. That's kind of our perspective on it.
I'd like to riff off that. It's a little different from the original question, Kit, but that really excites me, that we are able to say, yeah, it's one thing to know, it's another thing to do and provide. And my excitement in the world is, how do I actually teach people that, what do you actually do to increase your emotional intelligence? There are simple muscles, as you said, that if we focus on, and especially in community or like a group training, when you can have a whole number of people practicing with each other, there is such power in that. So I love that.
I have my own personal definition that I use, and it's sort of off that idea of, I don't know if you've ever heard the feminism is the radical notion that, women are people. That was a quote I always really love, where it's like, oh, do you like that? And I like emotional intelligence as the radical acknowledgement that emotions are the guiding force of the human experience. Mm. It is what's guiding everything. Like right now, I'm doing a bunch of stuff on a decision workshop. And if people have head injuries to the frontal lobe where they manage emotions, they can't make decisions anymore. It's guiding everything. And we always think of decisions as this logical thing where it's like, oh, well, I have all the data so I can make a decision. And that's not at all. We draw on our emotional memories. And I just really love that idea. I spent a long time, because I had all these definitions. I'm like, they all feel complicated. And I just, oh yeah, Trisha, I can repeat that. Emotional intelligence is the radical acknowledgement that emotions are the guiding force of the human experience. And it's pretty hard to argue with it, but actually practicing, like you two lovely people have just talked about, it is like, if you don't apply it, it has no meaning.
Yeah, I think when you say that, I think about Daniel Kahneman, right? The elephant rider. Right? So I would say science very much supports it. I've spent the last 10 or 15 years consulting in the neuroscience of change and neuroscience of leadership space. So that we can measure it. Like we can watch it. Like you can see gratitude in the medial prefrontal cortex with how sensitive it is or isn't. You can see empathy in the literal size of the right amygdala. And so that we have an emotional response. That's the elephant. And then if you're riding an elephant and the elephant decides to go left, you just use logic to describe, to make plans for what's going to happen as we go left. The challenge with that is so much of that is happening unconsciously, right? It's driving this, it doesn't feel like that. And from a lot, when we think about ourselves as rational thinkers, that we don't and that's, I think, emotional intelligence is being able to decode where those unconscious patterns are coming and showing up. Like, what does this feel like? And how is that driving my behavior? And that requires slowing down, system one from driving system two, or rather the elephant from just, running willy-nilly with the rider, just tagging along for fun, right?
I have a question for you too. So did you have a time? So for me, it was a little hard to accept this idea that emotions were driving things and that my logical brain was not driving. And I still have moments where I love data. I immediately go to data before I'm doing something. And then I'm like, you know what? Like, you're an emotional intelligence practitioner. Take a step back and actually really think about this. Did you have a time where you switched over to kind of accepting that the world is run this way, or anything?
Yeah, it feels a little vulnerable to say this, but actually probably not. I probably had to go in the other direction. I mean, I started as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist. I did my undergraduate degree, and I was like, what did I major in? Basically, I had relationships and had, that was what I did. That was my investment in life. That's how I operated. It's like, is my checkbook balanced? It feels like I have money. Yeah, I think, So to be honest, the other part of my brain has had to catch up. So I'm a little bit, my growth edge is in the other direction.
Very cool.
So there was a word that I caught in your explanation, because I have this conversation a lot with scientist friends of mine, especially that are very much really try to drive that rational, logical. Is you said you love money, you love numbers, right? So you describe the emotion that then allows you to actually really grab. So just because I am tied to a logical process, it's actually my love, my connection, my emotional attachment to that process that then allows me to spend extra time to give it priority. It's not the process itself, right? And so that's there's this old term of left brain, left being emotional, right being logical, but that's actually, the science is more about the left brain is macro, or rather micro, and the right brain is macro. Right. So one sees perspective, the other sees only what's in front of it. But both of those are still driven by emotion. And so when there's more of that, I love the numbers, or I love this, it's actually that left brain micro. I'm emotionally attached to that thing right in front of me. Right. So
yeah, I really like that point.
Me too.
I appreciate that a lot. I also love this idea that of talking about the brain as a non-integrated, it's logical or emotional. And it's like, no. This thing's integrated. And if it's not, that's something to look at as well.
Yeah. Well, and what I always like to do with my financial friends, I'm like, oh, you're not emotionally attached? Then write me a check for $10,000, or let me steal it from you, as a matter of fact, and see if there isn't an emotional response. But that's just not the case, right? And then how do you feel when, all of your, I like people that make lists. I'm like, yeah, I'll bet you could put that under your bed under your pillow at night and sleep. And again, that's there's a calm that comes with order, oftentimes for those.
Yeah, my question should have been about value. Where is your value place? Because it took me to value emotional experience, and to say to a client, because I was a CEO for 10 years, and that was not me going into a meeting to negotiate and saying, Fortune 50 company, I'd really like to talk to you about my emotional experience around this negotiation. It took me a really long time to be comfortable with bringing emotions into conversations where emotions normally do not exist. And there's definitely a way to do it.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. I don't know that I've ever thought about when, but it's almost a little personal. I grew up in a fairly abusive situation when I was a young kid, and you realize in those situations that there isn't a logical way out, that you have to understand what's driving the other individual's behavior as a survival mechanism. And then in juvenile corrections, working with kids like that, you can't logic your way out of meth addiction. It doesn't work that way. Now, in like cognitive behavioral therapy, we are using logical structures, but that's actually to then allow someone to start to tease out the emotional pieces of their decision making, to find out how connected they are to a decision. I always talk about, I had meth addicts that would tell me, I'm going to use drugs when I leave this thing. And you would ask them why. And well, initially you're just trying to talk them out of it. Logic. And then if you slow down to ask them why, they'll say, because my entire family does. And you understand that is that kind of impact need that our brain has. And that's an emotionally driven, like I would rather, be on a process that logically is going to kill myself than have this rejection, have this kind of emotional pain or social pain, as we call it, that would accompany, moving away from where, the family's going. Yeah.
We were talking about, I hope audience that you're loving what everyone is saying so far about Jules, Brian, and Rebecca saying. I love it when you all have your conversations, and I'm just like, wow, this is great. Just getting in your head. We talked about, using this as a muscle and practice earlier. I want to ask, how have you personally or your clients put it into use? As in, can you show us, like, what did they actually do? What did you think? What actually happened? What did they say? How did they process it? What was the practice or things that were done?
I teach people a couple practices. The first is really simple. It's the neuroscience cliche, name it and tame it, where you have an emotion running around in your brain and it creates a lot of reaction response. And if we name it, then we can, as Rebecca said, integrate it and know what to do with it. It's information. So for me, the first part is like, name it and tame it is a skill. And then it provides you with some really important information. That emotions are not bad or good, they're information. And so one of the simplest ways that I work with people is when you start a meeting, you do a lightning round. This takes a little practice to have it, people understand why you do it, but you just do an emotional check-in lightning round. You just put an emotional sheet to increase their vocabulary, put it in front of them, and you just say, where are you? Choose a few. What one hits you? And you say it out loud, and the team hears you. And then sometimes to keep it in a tight container, you can't at every meeting open it up to everyone, but you might say, are there one or two of you that want to just say what's attached behind that emotion so that we can just be with you, and then we can move into our meeting.
Quick follow-up question to that, Jules. Let's say a leader wants to start a meeting with that. How do you get across to your teammates, other people, if they feel like, why are we doing this?
Right. Well, as always, if you are the person of influence, it's best to let people know what you want to do. If you're creating the culture and changing the culture, which this would, then you let people open up the curtain and tell them what's going on behind the screen. Like, hey, I'm really learning to value this. I had no idea how important this was. You can use, Brian's elephant and rider, use that information. There's a bunch of resources. You could have them read a book, but essentially it's, hey, I'm going to change this. Here's what I'm going to do. And here's why. You demystify it. As we all know, the vulnerability, Brené Brown talks about this, you go first, leaders go first. So you put yourself out there first. That's kind of my thoughts. What do you guys think?
I would like to, I guess I'll sort of tell a story of something that was kind of like interesting that encompasses this. We were actually doing a merger and acquisition. So we do sort of the hybrid of emotional intelligence meets business consulting and the way that people understand. And I was so excited because I had done things like this just on the business side when I had been a businesswoman, which I still consider myself a businesswoman, but in sort of a different way. And we started with getting how everyone felt, but especially their vision. I'm obsessed with visioning. Like, what was the best outcome for you? Like, if you, and we got every single person, everyone's best outcomes. Of course, they look totally different. They did not align, but that didn't matter because everyone had each other's visions. What did they want? How did they want to feel at the end of it? What did they want to feel the second those things were signed? And what was really cool about it is they quickly realized that they didn't want to do the deal. Now, I've never seen an acquisition not just burn all the bridges in the room. They all work together now and like refer work back and forth because the relationships were built and preserved. And we made sure everyone knew that the goal was either to go ahead or not go ahead, but that we respected everyone in the deal. And it was so fun and exciting. And I was just sitting there, I was like, this is like magic if it wasn't so ordinary. It was just, so that was a really cool experience. So every client's different, but I love that story because I've never seen an acquisition that failed go well.
Yeah. So we're 6 months into a startup right now that is actually about using questions to kind of as an end around. One of the key components we found with people in these practice sessions is increased emotional intelligence, even though that wasn't necessarily like our goal and intention. I just, for me, on the brain science, like we've always known like questions are the kind of the best brain tool there is, but it's the least understood and utilized, right? Your brain can't not answer a question. So we've been doing this for the last year since the pandemic started, but I've actually been doing it for 5 years with friends where we would have, we have a group of 4 or 5 friends that every week we have a 1-hour call where we can only answer one question. And that is, what went well in the last week because of you? And in that question, you're looking at locus of control, like what is your agency? What is your impact on the world? There's a positive orientation of it, like what good thing is happening, which talking about the things you do well that you had an impact on, right, out loud is one of the most vulnerable things we can do. Like it's one of the riskier things because it opens you up to, right, rejection, criticism, those sort of things. And then we put a timeline in the week, so there's validation. So what we're doing is changing the way people validate and people build resilience and connection by changing the questions. And now we have, our members come every week. And so for instance, most people, the question they ask about gratitude is, what are you grateful for? What we would ask is, in the last week or month, what was the tell me about the moment that you felt the most grateful. And then they go 10 rounds a piece, or 10 minutes a piece. So groups of 3, each person gets 10 minutes where the other 2 people can only ask questions. And so what happens is they learn the self-regulation that happens when you try to give advice because you're trying to help, as opposed to letting the other person listen and be heard. We coach them to, when you ask a question and nobody responds, like, how are you regulating that? And so in these positively oriented kind of question-based conversations, we learn to read other people. And the beauty of that is, and Michael Lieberman talks about this a lot, that like our understanding of ourselves is inherently based on the people around us, because that's where we're getting our feedback, right? That's where and that's where social learning happens, the learning that isn't intellectual, and that's the lion's share of learning. And so if we can be more purposeful about how we create that, which is what we're trying to give people the tools to do, then we're focused on the muscle, piece of it. right? So I don't tell people you're going to increase you're going to become more empathetic here, but it happens, right? Because when somebody's sharing, the thing that went well for them was they got to spend 5 more minutes with their kid, and they start, getting emotional, then that person, that's a connection that wouldn't have happened if they didn't ask a question. Yeah. And for the person who was asked that question, they might not have had another place to share that experience.
Mm-hmm.
What if, and I wanted to tag back to, Brian, something that you said a little bit earlier. What if, let's say, we're scientists and we're just presenting to our group. We're not leading a group, and we have to maybe speak to the higher up. How can we put in emotional intelligence when we have to maybe be in our high stakes meeting, do a presentation, when we know we just have to present the stuff or say our part, and then we're not the main show here.
Yeah. And are you asking, just for clarification, are you asking that how to be more effective with that, or if that's our goal?
How to be more effective with emotional intelligence. If I'm going to do a presentation, or I'm in a meeting with executives, or I just have to, it's not my show. I'm just part of the show.
So that's a fantastic. So I've again been facilitating for 10 or 15 years, and so I've been running change workshops, teaching mindfulness to miners up in the Arctic Circle or oil and gas folks, right? And so there's a couple of things that I think emotional intelligence really lends itself well to. Number one is that everybody understands story. Rather, we construct our world in story. And so if I'm delivering information to other people, my first question is, what is their story? And how I'm disseminating this information actually helping them understand their story? How am I telling it in terms of their story, right? In if you will, their words. And the second part, because you'll never talk to me without me talking about questions, is having these questions purposefully put in there for people to contemplate doesn't mean they have to answer them, because your brain can't not answer a question. So what is this? How am I curating their story? How am I delivering to their story? And then what questions am I presenting that's going to spark their curiosity? Because when I'm done, even though I'm the one speaking, I want them to feel like they were heard, and they leave more curious about what's important to them relative to the topic. So to do that, right, that's emotional intelligence 101, right? That it's not about you, it's about them, and that and then it's about helping facilitate their kind of journey of discovery.
I think talking to different levels of management it's a different conversation. It's a different conversation if you're talking to a C-suite than if you're talking to a manager, if you're talking to a team. But hopefully emotional intelligence can sort of, I think of it as when you're trying to get a kid to eat broccoli, you put in the mac and cheese and they're like, this is delicious. You just kind of figure out what kind of mac and cheese they want. So a leader is usually isolated. They want to be respected. They want buy-in, but they also, their jobs are often very highly paid and a little bit fragile. Managers want their teams to do well, and they want more free time. And so you just figure out, what people want, and emotional intelligence very easily ties into those things. And then you give them as much as they can handle. And I think one of the most important things I've learned as a emotional intelligence practitioner is when to actually back off. And just let them sit with what they have, and just let them sit there with it, because they always, I've got CEOs doing meditation every day for the first time in their lives. That came after 2 years. That wasn't the day one thing. Mm-hmm. So it's about building trust, and it breaks trust to push people when they're not ready. So I spent a lot of time just seeing, being that nosy, pokey person. And then I'm like, okay, I'm good.
It kind of seems like we're all saying that once they taste it, they want it. Once they experience it, they know they need it. But until then, that's kind of our job, is finding a way to give them a way to dip their toes in the water and be like, oh yeah, I am thirsty. And then provide a pathway forward.
Yeah, and we kind of focus on, and my trick has always been, hey, help somebody else do this, because we know neurobiologically we get more by kind of a ratio of 5 to 1. You get more from giving than you do from receiving. So especially with leaders, right? They're saying, well, how can I help my people? How can I, influence my people? And let's be honest, sometimes how can I change this crappy behavior, right? And so if you can start approaching it from that, they can't but help but start to experience it themselves. And then you just get to kind of influence it. Well, how do you role model this? How do you, and so it's kind of like, if we start by how we help others, then we open the door to how we facilitate and help ourselves.
Yeah, human beings are really extraordinary. I've found, like, more and more doing this work, I'm just like, people are just extraordinary. They do get it. It just sometimes takes a little bit, but I keep on being amazed by the human spirits that I get to connect with. Mm-hmm. They get it.
So what can, let's say people, they're loving the talk right now. What can they do after they finish watching this video to increase their emotional intelligence? What are some things that they can literally do right after, would you say?
I'd say set a goal for yourself to increase your emotional vocabulary and get very clear, like a lot of coaching goals that people develop work around in this beginning stage of maybe at the afternoon, and then on your drive home, just say out loud, what are my emotions right now? Or get your emotion sheet out and just circle a few. Just that developing that depth of understanding of yourself is 101.
Two from other people in my life. I just found out this yesterday from my friend, because she reframed a horrific travel experience she was having. And she actually told me she sets an alarm to reframe every day because she's so busy. She's homeschooling. She's got it's been a hard year. And she, huge shout out to Kaz. She reframes. She has a little thing that goes off, and she's teaching herself to reframe things in a positive way, which I thought was really cool. And then gratitudes, if you can just, I guess gratitudes and self-compassion, just giving yourself compassion when you feel like you've made a mistake, just be like, hey, so did everyone else today. It's fine. Just giving yourself some love, some compassion, and gratitudes are extremely powerful. I do them all the time. Most people I know do. If you are sitting there saying how much you love and appreciate and are grateful for your work and the people around you, that's going to mirror back to you, and your life is going to just be better.
Yeah, I often tell people to shut up more. I kind of direct in there, but but that idea of like really listening to other people, but also even beyond that, there's a phrase we use quite a bit. It's stop listening so you can hear what's going on. What that means is, like, we get so involved in the content of a conversation and the content of our thinking. What am I going to do? What am I planning? What is this person saying? What do I need to say next? That we don't actually hear what's going on. And so the quieter I am, the more I can hear what's going on. And the more I'm able to, give another person a space to talk and not get so hyper-focused on the content that they're discussing, right? And really really kind of get curious about why that content is coming, like what's behind what this person is talking. What are they really trying to communicate? If I go back to that elephant rider, like, why are they talking so much? Oh, well, that might be an insecurity. That might be, then I can kind of get a better idea of hearing what's going on. And that practice, especially for me, I'm an introvert, and if I'm in an awkward situation, my lips don't stop moving, right? And so that practice of like slowing down and hearing what's happening is a lot of, it just lends itself to really a lot of self-understanding. Like, here's what's going on for me, but then the understanding of the other individual, and then you find yourself being much more effective, both with them and more importantly with yourself.
I wanted to tag on to this, and thank you all for answering. What habits? Okay, what if you had an ideal person who would take everything, okay, that you're saying? How would they live their day? Of course, it's nothing ideal. There's no perfect way of this. But if there was from morning, afternoon to evening, if someone were to be really good at emotional intelligence and emotionally aware, what would be the ideal way to live? And maybe you're working on this yourself, but what would be the ideal way to live morning, day, and evening to practice some of these things?
So I'll jump in first, and it's thematic for me, so it's nothing new, but it's authentically and positively curious, right? Curious about what the good things around them are and the good things within them are, and consistently when there's a challenge, what do I have to learn from this? That isn't, I learned not to do that. But that is, I learned that I can challenge. I learned that I can do this. And when I'm struggling with someone else, finding out what is a good part that is driving this individual's behavior. For instance, when people are angry, well, you can only be angry if you care about something. And if I'm curious about what they care about, right, of finding the kind of love that then drives anger oftentimes, then I can be more effective. But in that curiosity, again, that kind of positive curiosity, over time, that changes my brain structure, but more importantly, changes how I approach the world.
Mm.
I have a lot of answers in my head right now, but one that I would say is you can't be mindful without slowing down, and you can't be emotionally intelligent without being mindful. Mindfulness is the cornerstone of awareness, and without awareness, you can't self-regulate, and without self-regulation, you can't motivate, you can't have empathy, you can't build relationships. So if we're talking about like that cornerstone of all of this is self-awareness, you're going to have to slow your mind down to be mindful. And I can promise you that if you do slow your mind down, you will be actually able to act more quickly and decisively, because we're all like, the busy brain is not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to put mine into a package. Maybe I would say it's practicing the present moment. It's being fully aware of what is here right now, because we don't live in the past and we don't live in the future. We live right here. And I love that curiosity as first response. And I think it takes a while for people to make it authentic. I think as we learn it, it feels awkward. Feels like I'm practicing something, because you are, until it becomes internalized.
Yeah, and that in and of itself is authentic, right? We used to have, I referenced juvenile corrections, and we would tell kids, fake it till you make it, right? Because it doesn't feel, it's a new muscle. It's a new, right? If I'm used to responding, if I'm used to reacting really quickly, then pausing doesn't feel like me. And I can get caught up in, well, that's not authentically me. Well, no, it is. Like that discomfort is authentic. That feeling new is authentic. It's believing that you are one thing or the other that isn't quite as authentic as we often think, right? So yeah, so feeling like it's unnatural is absolutely authentic. So yeah.
So true.
I want to challenge you all because I love the answers that you're giving, but I'm also thinking from a perspective of a kid, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I think, like Rebecca is talking about, slow down to speed up, or Jules, be present or be curious. How do I slow down? How do I slow down to speed up? How do I be present? Like if I'm a kid, how do I? How do I do it?
Child, you mean kid?
Yeah, if you were to explain this to, like, I'm just thinking from like a child, like you told me to be present, Jill, like, what, like
okay, how? Yeah. So I've got 4 of these little people. And so that practicing the presence, kids, I would access that mirror neuron energy, where when I am with you, if we have neurons in our brain and that mirror the person who is looking into our eyes, right? And that makes that loop of connection between us. And so it's as simple as saying, honey, come here. I just want to, let me see you. Gosh, I'm noticing, you feel sad, or it looks like you're so happy you can't even, your hands can't stop moving. Or, I mean, it's sort of like a way of just creating the safe space between the two of you to exercise that muscle of I am present here with you right now. Let's stay right here. And actually with a kid, kids are always, they don't lose their physical love need until they hit, teenage years, which is sad. For some of us, some kids lose that part. But until then, we can really access even that skin connection and that physical connection. And all of that helps that be grounded in the moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's an amazing program at Yale that is an emotional intelligence program. They've just launched their sort of model for it is called Ruler, and they've launched it in 72 schools in Connecticut. And they are seeing phenomenal work with children. And a lot of it is just people being taught that their feelings are always valid. Getting like, oh, you're really upset. Here, let's give you a timeout so you can regulate. Not that you're bad, not that you're being punished, but so you can regulate. Oh, how do you think it made this other person feel? It's like they're doing this extraordinary work. And if you want to be inspired, like go watch some Ruler videos from Yale. They're just amazing. But I think that, in practical, it's every day just thinking like, okay, first of all, I once heard my cousin say, you can't deny a feeling. And she said it to her little boy. And it was just so beautiful. And I was like, you can't deny your emotions. Just even acknowledging them is like step one. So acknowledge how you're feeling. If you're really angry, even the bad ones, the shameful ones, just acknowledge all of them. And then think about how they're helping you. And that's like just the step one, because then you can regulate. Then you can say, okay, this is something I don't want to share, or this is something that won't help me in this situation. But that's really the cornerstone of it, is just having like that self-awareness. And after that, you can start really growing. But I think that like a lot of us struggle with that, especially in the United States, where I can't stress enough, like that's a lifelong struggle for everyone, is to just become the level of self-awareness where you're not ashamed of your feelings. You're not afraid to share them. And you can regulate them.
Yeah, and we're actually coming out. We've over the last 2 months, we've kind of slowed everything down because a lot of the members that are in our group were started to say, hey, we're changing how we interact with our kids. And so we have, we're calling them meaningful conversations, and then meaningful validation and meaningful connection. And this is, so what we know about asking a question is there's a term called instinctive elaboration. And what it means is, like, if I ask you, what was your first car? Right, you might not say it out loud, but it forces your brain to like kind of like decentralize the energy, right? So it forces it to kind of burn energy. And then the better the question, the more then that like it becomes almost an automatic emotional regulation tool, especially when you get more specific with the questions. And so what we're kind of providing as tools, but also helping kind of coach, parents or teachers or educators is using, for instance, kind of tied to like growth mindset, how they can learn from a situation. When I see a kid, working hard, there is one form of validation that says good job. But what if I slowed down and said, hey, I noticed that you were putting a lot of effort into that. Can you tell me, what's driving you? Like, why are you, like, where did you learn to do this? And that's where, then they get to kind of understand, right? Or if they look like they're happy. Hey, I noticed that you look like you were excited about that. Like, Like, what is it that you like about this? How did you create this? Those sort of things help in that understanding. And then on a broader, we actually, give a more detailed structure where instead of sitting at the dinner table and saying, how was your day? You would start by saying, you just start a broader discussion that, what is the thing that you most impacted this week? What was your part in doing that? What strength did you, develop while you were doing this? And then where can you do more of it in the future? We call those connection conversations. But I think the biggest thing, especially with teenagers, is providing safe places for them to be heard, because it's in that outward communication that they're playing with and sort of trying to figure out who they are. And as parents or as whether it's mentors or teachers, us being able to provide that space for them to explore, to screw up, where we're simply just curious about them, is a much better situation than the only place they have to explore that is with people or friends that may not have their best interests in mind. And so, again, I'm kind of really consistent in the questions bit, but I think with kids, allowing the more they can be heard in a safe space and discover who they are, and we can facilitate that, the better.
Yeah. And I want to ask, as we're winding down, Brian, Jules, and Rebecca, are you working on any special projects personally or for your organization? And where's the best place to follow up with you and continue the conversation from today? Brian, I'll pass it off to you, then Rebecca, and then Jules. But Brian, where's the best place to keep on, connecting with you?
You can find us at onemeaningfulquestion.com or on peoplestrength.com. And the one project we're working on is kind of tangential to these outlines with teens and for parents, is we're actually working with some teachers to create some curriculum so that their kids can learn to ask these questions of each other, and they kind of provide and help them build self-validation as a kind of consistent act. So we're working with some schools to do that as a kind of pro bono thing, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
Oh, great. That's great. Rebecca, what about you?
Okay. So you can go to our website. It's culturetheory.io. Or you can email me at hello@culturetheory.io. The thing I'm most excited about right now, besides our podcast, is we're going to be launching quarterly workshops in decision making. We're actually going live basically today. So I'm very excited. And what it is it's a set of 3 workshops with follow-up notes for managers to just help the whole organization make better decisions. And there's an assessment at the beginning and the end, so you can actually see the ROI on it. And I'm so excited about it. And it's cheap because it's new. So reach out. hello@culturetheory.io.
Okay, that's great. That's great. What about you, Jules?
You can find me at capacityleadership.com. And the best thing to do is to click on make a complimentary consultation for 30 minutes. And we'll just have a chat about what is going on for you and what kind of support would increase your emotional intelligence. My 2 creative pathways right now that are open I've been working in senior living for a number of years now, and working on developing EQ in senior living, and the needs of that particular industry have really radically changed. So we're revamping and establishing what are the new needs in that industry. And then the other thing is what I do really is what are the skills to do in the present moment right now in front of you. And I'm actually working with a number of coaches who have worked in the ICF world, but need more of this EQ in order to become elite coaches. And so those are my 2 exciting things.
Oh, that's great. Before we go for today, you gave us so many great insights, wisdom, and stories. Any last words before we leave for today?
Well, I really loved being on a panel with you 2. I think you're brilliant, and I love your work, and I already researched it, but I just hope that you continue to make huge, big changes in the world.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I really appreciate, both of you here. To answer, Trayvon, you can find it at onemeaningfulquestion.com or go find me on LinkedIn, Brian Fretwell. I'm pretty open book there, but really appreciate both of your perspective and also the questions you were asking, Kit. This was a lot of fun.
I'm leaving with a feeling of humility. Like, wow, I have a lot to learn. Wow, you guys know stuff I don't know. Like, it's a sandbox to play in, right? And there's so much to learn. And that's kind of where I'm like, oh, what's next? What do I want to learn next?
Yeah. And I think we can all take, I was, watching you from the back end as you were all talking. I think we can all just learn something from the way you were all interacting. I mean, when you were all giving, examples and exercises that you were doing with your clients, I was looking at the other panelists and you're like, oh yeah, that's really good. And it's like you were also curious and was just listening, based off the things that you were all saying, right? Being grateful, listening, being in touch with your emotions, sharing your story with us, right? So I just want to say again, thank you, Brian, Rebecca, Jules, for being on with us, and for the audience live or watching the replay. Thank you for tuning in. So if you did not get a chance to go connect with our amazing speakers and panelists, go connect with them after watching this today. But I want to say once again, everyone, thank you for coming out. Thank you for your time, panelists. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.